World War II and the rise of Hitler. As a youth, Adolf Hitler, 1889 to 1945, fled Austria, and went to Germany to escape the draft. He was arrested, and in February, 1914, a report was put in his file, which read in part, "Unfit for military or auxiliary service, too weak, incapable of bearing arms." This was the man that the Illuminati would choose to further their goals. As a puppet of the Illuminati, he was used to set the stage for the conflict which would eventually lead to the establishment of the United Nations, a major step towards one world government, and to shame the world into allowing the State of Israel to be established. Edward George Bulwer-Lytton, 1803-73, a graduate of Cambridge University, and a Mason, who became a member of the British Parliament, wrote a novel in 1871 called Vril, The Power of the Coming Race, about a super race of white Aryans that took control of the world. Researchers consider him responsible for the birth of the Nazi movement, because Hitler was said to have been influenced by this book, and another novel, Rienzi, The Last of the Roman Tribunes, which was adapted into a major opera by German composer Richard Wagner. After seeing Rienzi for the first time in November, 1906, Hitler talked about a mandate which, one day, he would receive from the people, to lead them out of servitude to the heights of freedom. He believed that he would be entrusted with a special mission. He later told Frau Wagner, the composer's widow, "In that hour it began, the Nazi movement known as National Socialism." History shows that Hitler ordered the death of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust in Europe. Why he did, has become a mystery, since it really hasn't been established that he had an intense hatred for Jews. A U.S. Office of Strategic Services psychological report by Walter C. Langer, later published as The Mind of Adolf Hitler, says that the young Hitler was befriended by Jewish art dealers who paid generously for his mediocre watercolors. Because of his financial situation, a Jewish landlady charged him only a nominal rent, and even moved out of her apartment on one occasion so that Hitler and a friend could have more room. A Jewish used clothing dealer gave him a long black overcoat, which he wore constantly. When he was a lance corporal during World War I, Hitler was awarded the Iron Cross, first and second class, a rare honor for a soldier of such low rank, who hadn't really done anything to deserve such a distinction. He learned later, that the commendation was the result of the efforts of the regimental adjutant, Hugo Gutmann, a Jew. When he became Führer, Hitler hired a Jewish maid to do his cooking. On one occasion, when it was suggested that he get rid of her, he became furious. Dr. Edward Bloch, a Jewish physician, had been the Hitler family doctor since Hitler was a child. Bloch had treated Hitler's mother when she was dying of cancer. After her funeral, Hitler accompanied his sisters to thank him, and said, "I shall be grateful to you forever." He sent the doctor 2 postcards, one that he hand-painted. Both of them said, "From your ever-grateful patient, Adolf Hitler." Hitler had even wondered if he himself was Jewish. This idea stemmed from the fact that Hitler's father, Alois, was illegitimate, and the identity of his grandfather had never been established. During Hitler's rise to power, his half-brother's son threatened to reveal that Hitler was of Jewish ancestry. One investigation discovered that Hitler's grandfather had been the son of a Jewish family called Frankenberger, in Graz, who employed Hitler's grandmother, Maria Anna Schickelgruber, as a maid. She had become pregnant by their son, while she was working in their home. The family sent her money for a year and a half to help support the child. Another investigation said that Alois was conceived in Vienna, where Hitler's grandfather was employed as a servant in the home of Baron Rothschild. Maria was sent home to Spittal, where Hitler's father was born. In Hitler's War, written in 1977 by British author and historical revisionist, David Irving, he revealed that Hitler didn't order the Jewish massacres, and didn't find out about it until late in the war. There is no record of Hitler ever visiting a concentration camp, although he did watch films and see photographs. So what turned Hitler against the Jews, if indeed he was, or was there someone else making decisions for him? As early as 1919, he spoke of removing Jews altogether, and in his book Mein Kampf, written while he was in prison in 1924, for the Beer Hall Putsch, spoke of the overthrow of world Jewry. "I believe that I am today acting according to the purposes of the Almighty Creator. In resisting the Jew, I am fighting the Lord's battle." On January 30, 1939, he said in a speech to the Reichstag, "Today I want to be a prophet once more. If international finance Jewry inside and outside of Europe should succeed once more in plunging nations into another world war, the consequence will not be the Bolshevization of the earth and thereby the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe." In a public speech in Munich, on November 8, 1942, he said that international Jewry will be recognized in its full demonic peril. "We National Socialists would see to that." Hitler had read the protocols of the learned elders of Zion, and in 1942, was told by Himmler, that they were forged. However, Hitler disregarded that fact and said, "We shall regain our health only by eliminating the Jew." He attributed the weakness of the German economy to the Jews, and considered the Treaty of Versailles a Jewish document. He even accused the Jews of spreading communism, yet in a speech on February 5, 1941, said that basically, National Socialism, Nazism, and communism are the same. Why does the life of Hitler seem to be a series of contradictions? One clue was revealed in the secret diaries of Hitler's doctors, written in 1983 by David Irving, which revealed that Hitler had taken 75 different medications. He was given strychnine and belladonna, for gas, cocaine and adrenaline, for conjunctivitis, amphetamines, painkillers, and sedatives, including Eucadil, a synthetic morphine derivative. One has to wonder if Hitler was even aware of what he was being given. Were they being given to him for the sole purpose of making him mentally unstable, so he could be controlled by advisors, who were acting on behalf of the forces that Hitler wrongly identified as the Jewish bankers? There may also be a more sinister reason which contributed to Hitler's state of mind. Hitler and some of his officers had been linked to various occult groups, and the use of the swastika gave evidence of that. In its normal usage, it is a sign of the power of light, but in its reverse form, as used by the Nazis, it represents the power of darkness. According to writer Joseph Carr, we know that Hitler and his top luminaries were either dabblers in the occult, or outright Satanists. As a youth, Hitler had been influenced by George Lanz von Liebenfels, an Austrian magician who in 1907 founded the Order of the New Templars, which used the swastika as its emblem. He wrote in a 1932 letter that Hitler was one of his pupils and that one day he would develop a movement that will make the world tremble. Hitler joined a secret group in 1919, called the Thule Society, which practiced black magic and worshipped Satan. They wanted to form a political party to rally the people against communism. Its members were drawn from the upper echelon of society. The founder, Dietrich Eckart, was one of the 7 founding members of the Nazi Party, and said on his deathbed, "Follow Hitler. He will dance, but it is I who have called the tune. I have initiated him into the secret doctrine, opened his centers in vision and given him the means to communicate with the powers. Do not mourn for me, I shall have influenced history more than any other German." Hitler grew to fear those around him who practiced the black arts, and it was discovered that along with the Jews, Masons and occult practitioners were also killed and imprisoned in the concentration camps. Some of the reported book burnings were actually the confiscation and destruction of Masonic libraries. Karl Ernst Haushofer, who created the Vril Society, which made up the inner circle of the Nazi Party, also of the Thule Society, was the university professor who schooled Hitler on geopolitics. Hitler was also influenced by the writings of Friedrich Nietzsche, from whose name came the word Nazi. In 1943, Hitler's birthday gift to Mussolini was the collected works of Nietzsche. In the fall of 1919, Hitler joined the German Workers' Party, and soon became one of its leaders. In the summer of 1920, it was renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party, and then in 1923, it became known as the Nazi Party. Because of Hitler's failed November revolt, he was jailed on April 1, 1924, sentenced to 5 years, but was released after 8 months, so he could be built up to national prominence. Though Mein Kampf was published as a work of Adolf Hitler while he was in prison, it was discovered later that it was actually written by Nazi politicians Rudolf Hess and Hermann Wilhelm Goering, and possibly Haushofer, as a follow-up to the Karl Marx book A World Without Jews. The Illuminati made sure the book was well circulated, and it became the springboard for Hitler's political career. In 1925, Dr. Karl Duisberg, I.G. Farben's first chairman, and founder of the Bayer Company in the United States, said, "Be united, united, united." This should be the uninterrupted call to the parties of the Reichstag. We hope that our words of today will work, and will find the strong man who will finally bring everyone under one umbrella, for he is always necessary for us Germans, as we have seen in the case of Bismarck. The depressive economic situation in Germany at the time, created by the Versailles Treaty, made it possible for Hitler's leadership to take root, and he became Chancellor in January 1933. Since 1924, the Dawes Plan flooded Germany with a tremendous amount of American capital, which enabled Germany to build its war machine. The 3 largest loans went into the development of industries, such as IG Farben Company, the German company which became the largest corporation in Europe, and the largest chemical company in the world, after a $30 million loan from the Rockefellers' National City Bank after World War I, and who created a process of making high-grade fuel from low-quality coals, and Vereinigte Stahlwerke, who produced about 95% of Germany's explosives. In 1939, Standard Oil of New Jersey sold IG Farben $20,000 worth of high-quality aviation fuel. IG Farben's assets in the United States were controlled by a holding company called American IG Farben Chemical Corporation. On the board of directors of this corporation was Edsel Ford, president of the Ford Motor Company, Charles E. Mitchell, president of National City Bank in New York City, Walter C. Teagle, president of Standard Oil of New York, Paul Warburg, chairman of the Federal Reserve, and Hermann Metz, director of the Warburg's Bank of Manhattan. Several Germans on this board were found guilty of war crimes at Nuremberg. A U.S. War Department investigation revealed that without Farben's support, Germany's prosecution of the war would have been unthinkable and impossible. Hitler received support and financing from the aristocracy and elite of Germany, including Gustav Krupp, industrialist, Karl Duisberg, founder of IG Farben, Ernst Tengelmann, director of the Ruhr coal mining operation, Dr. Hjalmar Schacht, prominent banker, and Fritz Thyssen, chairman of the board of United Steel Works, Germany's largest company. Hitler maintained that the Nazi Party would continue only until the German people had been freed from the threat of Marxism and could reach a decision as to whether the final form of government would be a republic or a monarchy. Thyssen told the Kaiser that Hitler was made chancellor only as a transitional stage leading to the reintroduction of the German monarchy. America's ambassador to Germany, William Dodd, reported to President Roosevelt in August 1936, "At the present moment, more than 100 American corporations have subsidiaries here or cooperative understandings. The DuPont have their allies in Germany that are aiding in the armament business. Their chief ally is the IG Farben Company, the primary supporter of Hitler. Standard Oil Company, of New York, sent $2 million here in December 1933, and has made $500,000 a year helping Germans make Ersatzgas for war purposes, but Standard Oil cannot take any of its earnings out of the country except in goods. The International Harvester Company president told me their business here rose 33% a year but they could take nothing out. Even our airplane people have secret arrangements with Krupps. General Motors Company and Ford do enormous business here through subsidiaries and take no profits out. I mention these facts because they complicate things and add to war dangers. Germany's two largest tank producers were Opel, a subsidiary of General Motors, controlled by J.P. Morgan and the DuPont, and Ford A.G., a subsidiary of the Ford Motor Company. International Telephone and Telegraph, ITT, held a substantial interest in Focke-Wulf, an airplane manufacturer who produced German fighter aircraft. Prior to World War II, the Round Table Organization, through various means, made sure Hitler wasn't stopped in Austria, the Rhineland, or Sudetenland. His financing was done through the Warburg-controlled Mendelssohn Bank of Amsterdam, and the J. Henry Schroeder Bank, financial agent for the Nazi government, which had branches in Frankfurt, London, and New York. The chief legal counsel for the Schroeder Bank was the firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, whose senior partners included CFR members John Foster Dulles, who was the top policymaking director for the International Nickel Company, who helped negotiate an agreement with Farben which helped the Nazis to stockpile nickel for war purposes, and his brother Allen Dulles, who was a director on the board of the J. Henry Schroeder Bank, and later became the head of the CIA. They were cousins to the Rockefellers, who later got a controlling interest in Farben. Hitler indirectly received financing from the Krupps, Kennedys, and the Rothschild. The liaison between Hitler and Wall Street was Hjalmar Horace Greeley Schacht, the president of Reichsbank, who aided in the rebuilding of Germany. His father worked in the Berlin office of the Morgan-controlled Equitable Trust Company of New York. Without a shadow of a doubt, Hitler was controlled by the Illuminati. The Holocaust had begun with the Jews being stripped of their German citizenship, and from 1939-45, Hitler's death camps claimed the lives of 6 million Jews, or about 1/3 of the entire Jewish race. The world turned against him, and his actions instigated World War II, which had actually been planned years before. Another reason for World War II was to make it possible for Russia, our ally at the time, to gain strength and receive recognition as a world power. Although they were our ally, they were still a communist nation, with growing designs on world domination. There is an incredible amount of evidence that indicates the willingness of our government to allow the spread of communism, because of the efforts of communists who had been employed and were acting on behalf of the Illuminati. In May 1943, the Allies had pushed the Germans out of Africa, invading Sicily in June, and in September, pushed their way through Italy, on the way to southern Germany, their weakest point. However, the US withdrew troops from the invasion force so they could be used in a later invasion of France. In his 1950 book Calculated Risk, General Mark Clark said that this decision was made at high level and for reasons beyond my field and knowledge. Churchill had wanted the attack to bring the Central European and Balkan countries under Allied control, before they were allowed to slip into red slavery. But instead, under the leadership of General Dwight David Eisenhower, the German advance was spread out, which allowed the Russian forces to advance. Was this an intentional move on the part of the United States to allow the Russians an opportunity to pursue their ulterior motives? It certainly seems so. In the spring of 1943, a faction within the German Secret Service was prepared to assassinate Hitler and surrender, on one condition: that the Soviets would not be allowed to advance into Central Europe. Roosevelt refused to accept, and postponed a planned European invasion, in order to give the Russians more time to advance, and occupy more land. According to military documents released in 1970, General Eisenhower allowed the Russians to get to Berlin first, before the Americans, which eventually allowed part of the city to fall under communist control. Russia was able to come away from 1945 conference in Yalta with so much, because Roosevelt believed that the Russians were perfectly friendly. They aren't trying to gobble up the rest of Europe. These fears that have been expressed by a lot of people here that the Russians are going to try and dominate Europe, I personally don't think there is anything to it. I have just a hunch that Stalin doesn't want anything but security for his country, and I think that if I give him everything I possibly can, and ask nothing in return, he won't try to annex anything and will work for a world of democracy and peace. Russia walked away from the bargaining table with Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Eastern Poland, East and Central Europe, North Korea, the Kuril Islands, and the northern part of Sakhalin. An American general, Albert C. Wedemeyer, was convinced that Russia was the only winner of World War II. He said, Stalin was intent on creating favorable conditions for the realization of communist aims throughout the Balkans and Western Europe. He emerged as the only winner of the war. We ensured the emergence of a more hostile, menacing predatory power than Nazi Germany, one which has enslaved more people than we liberated. General George S. Patton wanted to retire because he planned on being able to speak his mind about America being soft on communism. However, before resigning his commission, he died after an automobile accident forced him to be hospitalized. In 1979, Douglas Bazata, a former Secret Service agent for the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the predecessor of the CIA, revealed that he was ordered by the director Wild Bill Donovan to kill Patton in 1944. Although he didn't, he knows who did, and said that Patton was killed with cyanide at the hospital he was taken to after the accident. Frank Murphy, appointed by Roosevelt to the post of Attorney General in 1938, and later, as a Supreme Court justice, told Congressman Martin Dies, "We're doomed. The United States is doomed. The communists have control completely. They've got control of Roosevelt and his wife as well." In 1949, upon waiting to be released from a Detroit hospital, he died of a heart attack. James Forrestal, a partner and president of Dillon, Reed, and Company, was appointed Secretary of the Navy in 1944, then the Secretary of Defense in 1947, till Truman asked him to resign in 1949. After the war, he became dedicated to destroying communism, because it seemed as though the United States was constantly yielding to them. Truman believed Forrestal was under a lot of mental stress, and had him admitted to the U.S. Naval Hospital at Bethesda, Maryland. His personal diaries, consisting of 15 loose-leaf binders, about 3,000 pages, were removed from his office at the Pentagon, and held at the White House. Forrestal had told a friend that he was being followed, and that his phone was tapped. He noticed the beginnings of the Korean War, 15 months before it actually started. Once he was in the hospital, he was allowed no visitors. On May 22, 1949, his brother, Henry Forrestal, decided to take his brother for a ride into the country. That same day, James Forrestal jumped from the 16th floor of the hospital. Found on a third-floor projection, the cord of his bathrobe was tied around his neck, and the hospital released a statement that he committed suicide, even though there was not enough evidence to prove that he had. In 1951, his diaries were published by Viking Press, but they were heavily censored by the White House, the Pentagon, and Walter Millis, of the New York Tribune, so the full story could never be known. His family priest, Monsignor Maurice S. Shee, said, many times in his letters to me, Jim Forrestal wrote anxiously and fearfully and bitterly of the enormous harm that had been, and was unceasingly being done, by men in high office in the United States government, who he was convinced were communists or under the influence of communists, and who he said were shaping the policies of the United States government to aid Soviet Russia and harm the United States. To this day, Forrestal continues to be labeled as being insane, and the cause of his death remains unknown. Towards the end of 1949, 3 men visited the office of Senator Joseph McCarthy to show him an FBI report detailing the communist penetration of the State Department and other government spy networks. On February 9, 1950, in a speech before the Ohio County Women's Republican Club of Wheeling, West Virginia, he said, "I have in my hand 57 cases of individuals who would appear to be either card-carrying members or certainly loyal to the Communist Party, but who nevertheless are still helping to shape our foreign policy." A special subcommittee of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee was established to investigate where there were disloyal people employed at the State Department. However, instead of investigating the accusations, they investigated McCarthy, and a wave of anti-McCarthy sentiment swept the country. On September 23, 1950, McCarthy revealed what would happen because of the Yalta Conference in 1945. Here was signed the death warrant of the young men who were dying today in the hills and valleys of Korea. Here was signed the death warrant of the young men who will die tomorrow in the jungles of Indochina, Vietnam. And McCarthy was accused of smearing the reputation of innocent people, and on July 30, 1954, Senator Ralph Flanders introduced a resolution condemning him for conduct unbecoming a member. The speech by Flanders was written by the National Committee for an Effective Congress, which had been created by Arthur Goldsmith, who compiled the charges against McCarthy. He was originally charged with 46 counts, but after the hearings, only 2 remained, and the Senate voted only to censure him, which is a milder punishment than condemning him. McCarthy died on May 2, 1957 at the Bethesda Naval Hospital of acute hepatic failure. No autopsy was ever performed, leading many to believe that he was killed because he was closer to the truth than most people ever dreamed. Of the 81 security risks that McCarthy said was in the State Department, by November 1954, they had all been removed, either by dismissal or resignation. Over a year later, the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee revealed that they had a list of 847 security risks in the State Department. Louis Boudins, a former communist, said, "The destruction of Joe McCarthy leaves the way open to intimidate any person of consequence who moves against the conspiracy." The communists made him their chief target because they wanted him a symbol to remind political leaders in America not to harm the conspiracy or its world conquest designs. All of this information should prove the contention that the invisible forces at work within our government used World War II as a means of promoting the Russian goal of conquest, and allowed the spread of communist propaganda.